Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 13th of December 2024. Before we start on the military aid stuff, just to remind you, there's a Christmas fundraiser going on with a bunch of other YouTube supporters of Ukraine. War Translated, Shills, Rick the Ukrainian, Suchimimus, Silicon Curtain, Operator Starsky, so on and so forth. Please support our fundraising efforts. We are 70% there already for our first truck. I think we might extend that to a second truck. That would be fantastic. So yeah, the link to that will be in the description below. In less than 24 hours we've done that. We were one of the later ones to be put on, so I'm really proud of you guys for doing this so quickly. Absolutely brilliant. Mikado was on there much before us, and you know, we've got 80 donations. Absolutely phenomenal. Okay, just to also give you some extra information about the strikes last night on mainly Ukrainian energy infrastructure, the largest drone and missile attack since the beginning of the war combined, I think, or at least it's one of the largest ones. I was saying it sounds like it could have been a retaliation to the ATACMS attack on Taganrog. Well, Russian MOD has said on December the 11th, 2024, Ukraine launched this missile strike with 6 ATACMS missiles at a military airfield near Taganrog. In response, Russia carried out a massive precision strike on critical fuel and energy infrastructure in Ukraine, targeting facilities vital to the military-industrial complex. According to the Russian MOD, the targets were hit successfully. In other words, this was, or at least that's what they're saying. I don't know. I think they were stockpiling these anyway, and it might just be a sort of after-the-fact rationalization. But this is claimed to be retributive from the Russians there. 6 missiles the Ukrainians sent at a military target, a whole, couple of hundred drones, and however many missiles as well sent at Ukraine, and 90 odd missiles sent throughout the length and breadth of Ukraine to hit predominantly energy infrastructure. Is that a symmetry there? I don't think so. Absolutely despicable, especially since actually it's got nary a mention on the mainstream media outlets. Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency has said 5 of Ukraine's 9 operating nuclear reactor units have reduced power output due to renewed attacks on the energy infrastructure. The occupiers staged a massive attack on Ukraine today and tried to hit about 300 targets with missiles and drones. Wow. Okay, so moving on to military aid, though. We're going to start with, according to the White House, Joe Biden has approved a new military aid package for Ukraine. It's the 72nd of its kind, which will include air defense systems, drones, armored vehicles, and artillery. So let's go and have a look at it. This is what we know so far. $500 million aid package, which is good news there. Counter unmanned aerial systems, so counter drone munitions, ammunition for HIMARS, artillery ammunition 155 and 105. Harms anti-radiation missiles. That's useful. So you'll fire them from planes to strike at radar installations, part of air defense systems and whatnot. Unmanned aerial systems, so drones, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles, MRAPs, high mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicles, Humvees. They've already got, I think, 2,000 Humvees on the way from one of the previous packages. So it's an awful lot of Humvees. I was expecting Bradleys, but we don't see them here. We have light tactical vehicles. Don't know what they might be. Chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, CBRN, protective equipment, Javelin and anti-AT-4 anti-armor systems, so anti-tank guided missiles, tube launch optically glided wire-tracked missiles, those are tow missiles for the top of Bradleys, small arms ammunition, demolitions equipment, ammunitions and spare parts, ancillary equipment, services, training and transportation. So a pretty substantial aid package given there by the US. They really are trying to exhaust that aid before the Biden administration runs out of time, before January the 20th. Now, On top of that, the US has announced over $440 million in economic aid for Ukraine. I'm not sure where this is coming from. The economic aid package is comprised of 4 key parts, including $223 million to rebuild transportation infrastructure and logistics. Okay, let's look at a bit more detail at this. So $74.7 million to support export-orientated agriculture, $223 million for the transport system, infrastructure and logistics, $35 for the Ukraine Recovery Trust Fund, and $105 to finance new jobs involved in recovery and industry. So this is the idea that there's no point just giving military aid to Ukraine if you allow the country to completely fail. If the country fails, then the army is supporting nothing and there will be no kind of reason to fight. So you need to be doing both. So some people might look at this and go, what's the point of doing that? You need to give money to the armed forces. Actually, it's not either or. It's not a false dichotomy. You actually need to be doing both. If there's no if there's no employment, if there's no functioning industry, no functioning economy, then the army is fighting for nothing, and you'll have a complete collapse of the country, and it can't sustain itself. If it can't sustain itself, it can't help to build its own munitions. Give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. That's that kind of approach here, which is, okay, we can keep giving you stuff, or we can support your whole economy for being able to manufacture your own stuff. That's really what we want to be doing, and that's all part of that as well, because that will be funded by agricultural exports, so you need to support agricultural exports, etc., etc. Okay, moving on to France. So France will continue to supply SCALP missiles to Ukraine. We had no red line on this issue, and military targets on Russian territory are legitimate. So that's French ambassador to Ukraine saying exactly the right things there. It's also said that they are going to deliver the Mirage 2005 to Ukraine. No time put on that, but it's fairly sure it's going to be imminent. Now, a little bit more detail here. This is Gal Vessier saying, yes, we continue to provide SCALP missiles. We don't have many. We have, and we have to buy more. So it takes time. It's also complicated because we have to ensure that our country's protection is fine, but we are making the efforts as much as we can, and we are sending new French SCALP missiles to Ukraine, as Britain is sending some Storm Shadows, and the Americans provide with ATACMS. So that's, all of us are doing our parts. French don't have many. We are building them again. We need to make sure we've got some ourselves. The British are doing it. The Americans are doing it. But we don't have any red lines, say the French, which is fantastic. Now, the foreign ministers of UK, Italy, Spain, Germany, Poland and France, along with top EU diplomat Kaja Kallas, have pledged to increase aid to Ukraine. So remember, they met. The ministers pledged to increase aid to Ukraine, including, quote, by mobilizing additional European funding. So that's good news. So Anton Gerashchenko here reports on an interview that Kaja Kallas gave, her first one since assuming her new position as EU diplomacy chief. Ukraine was, of course, a major topic of discussion. Here are the highlights. Kallas supports using $210 billion in frozen Russian assets held in the EU to aid Ukraine, describing them as a tool to pressure Russia. Funds would compensate Ukraine for the damage caused by the Russian invasion. She acknowledges legal challenges to seizing the funds, but predicts progress towards that goal. Europe must increase financial aid to Ukraine if the US reduces its support, especially with Donald Trump returning to the White House. Financial support for Ukraine is an investment in European and global security, and it's not charity. Such an important point, and it needs to be continually made, that one. The voters of our countries that are supporting Ukraine need to understand that it's not a support that's born from a charitable contribution to a country that's in a poor state of affairs and we're just being nice. This is in our best interest. It's also nice and it's also moral, but that only goes so far. Generally, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you are only going to be giving to charity when you're kind of reaching the top of that pyramid, if you've got all the other things sorted out. Which means that you can only really give to charity when you've got that that disposable income. Like if you're on a breadline, you're not going to be donating to charity as much as if you are a billionaire, right? So you don't have the scope to be able to do that. That's the same for a country, at least in the perceptions of the electorate. So what you need to explain is that rather than this is something that you are doing, helping Ukraine is something you do only when you get to the very top, which is all your other things are sorted out. So in an individual, that's your heating, your shelter, your food, your physiological needs, your work needs, blah, blah, blah. You move up the hierarchy of needs triangle to get to self-actualization at the top. For a nation, that's going to be, right, we've got a healthcare system sorted out, we've got our this sorted out, we've got that sorted out, blah, 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 blah. Then you move to the top, right, we're a rich country, we've got loads of money, we're going to help out another country that's in a time of need. No, what this is actually doing is taking the support for Ukraine further down the hierarchy of needs. So you're in your security. So when you're talking about, it's difficult to reach self-actualization as a human if you are dealing with elements of security. Like, I'm not secure. I'm not going to be sitting down thinking, I'm going to have an existential thought about what my place is in the universe if I'm getting chased by a tiger, right? So I need to make sure my security is fine, and I've got shelter, and I've got a house. Right now, I've got a job. Okay, now I'm in a position where I can sit down with a cup of tea and go, right, okay, I wonder whether God exists or not. Or I sit back and go, what does beauty mean? Or I'm going to sit back and go, yeah, what's the meaning of life? Okay, that's when I do that self-actualization, kind of like, what's my place in the universe? But that is built on, am I secure? So that's further down the list of things we need to sort out. So for a country, helping Ukraine is part of our security. It's part of our getting a safe shelter, safe house, as an individual. So I think that's important to understand. I know I'm spitballing here, but actually I think that makes a lot of sense. That you need to sell to your electorate that we are giving money to Ukraine because actually it's part of our national security in order to do so. Okay. Aiding Ukraine means preventing future large-scale wars and deterring other threats like North Korea and China. Commenting on the recent discussions between Putin and European leaders, including Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Kallas said, quote, "They, Orban and Scholz, are doing this for domestic purposes, so I wouldn't do it. But this is not for me to criticise." Kallas noted that the upcoming meeting of foreign ministers would assess whether such diplomacy has any real benefit. Kaja Kallas drew a connection between the recent developments in Syria and the ongoing war in Ukraine, suggesting that Russia's failure to maintain its support for the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad could be a sign of vulnerability. What we saw in Syria is that they are able to keep up that fight, Kallas said, referring to Russia's struggle to sustain its ally in the region. Russia was somewhat humiliated in Syria, Kallas observed, adding that Russia's intention was elsewhere, which may have implications for its military strategy in Ukraine. She emphasised that the war for Ukraine remains winnable, drawing a parallel between Russia's setbacks in Syria and the potential for similar challenges in Ukraine. So that comes from that Guardian piece there that this source says billions of Russian state funds frozen in the European Union should be used to aid Ukraine, according to the EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas. Okay, moving on. Timothy Ash says the irony here is that some of the lowest NATO spenders on defence, Belgium and Italy, are leading the pack in blocking the use of the $330 billion in immobilised Russian assets for Ukraine. They should be overruled. Interesting there. So this is in response to Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, as I reported yesterday, saying we must switch to a wartime mindset. We are at war, basically, and we need to be thinking in those terms. Italy, having mentioned just Italy there as being this big nation, big economy, big member of the EU, but not really giving as much to either NATO or Ukraine as they should be. So Noel Report says Italy is ready to participate in a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine, according to the Defence Minister Cossetto. Quote, "We are prepared to play this role where our nation has always excelled," he stated after the 20th 5-5 Defence Summit in Madrid. And then Ukraine will soon receive one of the power units from the Estonian Orvera power plant. Thank you, Estonia. So I think this is where Estonia have got some disused power plants that are relevant. I think probably thermal power plants relevant for Ukraine, who have had power plants that have been absolutely knackered, including last night, 50% power. The Ministry of Energy of Ukraine noted that the power unit is capable of providing electricity to about 150,000 people. 2 more power units are also being discussed for transfer in 2025. That would be super, super useful. So thank you, Estonia. Czech company AKM Group CZ has delivered a batch of various types of ammunition to the Ukrainian Defence Forces, according to Miliciani. The list included 82mm, 120mm mortar rounds, cartridges, S-8 aviation missiles, and F-1 grenades. Excellent. And what else do we have? Finland continues to provide material assistance. Truckloads of solar panels have been delivered to Ukraine. So during May and November, Finland delivered 68 truckloads of civilian material assistance to Ukraine. Finland is actively providing Ukraine with that stuff. So good news there, including solar panels. I've talked about diversifying and decentralizing the energy grid in Ukraine. I think that's important for their own sustainable energy production going forward. And when you have massive attacks like last night, you take out a power station, you know, all the people in that area are screwed. Whereas if you've got energy if you've got sufficient energy producers, like a school or a hospital having their own solar panels, then they can at least still operate somewhat effectively. Or maybe some wind turbines here and there, or whatnot, and that would be super useful. For example, I've got solar panels, right? And if we had a power cut here, then I could still operate. I could still work, right? So that would be super useful if there was more of that in Ukraine. A Finnish defence company is establishing production for Ukraine in Finland, together with Ukrainian companies. So this is working in collaboration with Ukraine to produce what Ukraine needs: drones, and more drones. We also hear that I reported the other day that China is not exporting drone components they're putting a kibosh on that to allies and of Ukraine. Well, a response is an absolutely crucial effort. Quote, it's a persistent problem with the drone supply to Ukrainian troops. Imported Chinese drones are often laden with defective parts. If you remember, Greg Terry and Zhenya were sourcing chips to replace a load that United 24 had got from China that had what appeared to be chips that were purposefully tampered with. So it's not just that they're badly made, it's that actually someone in a Chinese plant has on purpose screwed up these drones for the Ukrainians. In the face of these threats, Ukraine's drone industry is increasingly onshoring the production of more ambitious components. So that's super important, making more stuff in Ukraine to get around that kind of problem. And Polish Prime Minister said Warsaw does not plan to send troops to Ukraine even after a ceasefire. So there's that talk between Macron and Tusk yesterday that could have been about some 40,000 troops post ceasefire that would have been provided by European allies. Tusk has said, I want to take this opportunity to put an end to speculation regarding the presence of troops from any country in Ukraine after a truce, ceasefire or peace is achieved. Sorry. Decisions regarding Poland's actions will be made in Warsaw and only in Warsaw. For now, we are not planning such actions, emphasised the Prime Minister Donald Tusk. So he said for now, so that's important. But I guess it's maybe a response to Trump saying Europe are going to do this. And he's like, actually, we're the ones that are going to decide whether we're going to do that. So decisions regarding Poland's actions will be made in Warsaw, only in Warsaw. So I don't think that's a kind of repudiation of Macron. It sounds more like a rebuttal to Trump trying to dictate what goes on in Europe. Which, to be honest, it is a little bit galling, especially since this is, a kind of carry on from the Cold War. This is America's war, although you get people like America First Patriot saying, this is not in America's interest. We should put America first. Well, actually, you were the ones at the forefront of the Cold War. This is the new iteration of the Cold War. The Soviet Union is now Russian Federation, and you are a major enemy, and so this is in your best interests. And that's precisely why you have had troops in Europe for the last 70 years. So you know, this is to do with the US, whether they like it or not. BRICS and Russia are seeking to present an alternative to the dollar, an alternative to the US global hegemony. Like, they are challenging you. If you're just going to sit back and isolate in the US, fair enough, go for it. But you know, when it all comes back to bite you on the arse, don't come to us for assistance. Okay, Trump's statement that permission to strike deep into Russia leads to escalation coincides with the Kremlin's position. I mean, goodness me, if this doesn't tell you everything. So Trump has come out and said he's vehemently against striking, using US ATACMS, for example, to strike deep into Russia. And then Peskov has come out and said, well, Trump's statement that permission to strike deep into Russia leads to escalation coincides with the Kremlin's position. In other words, Trump is aligned to the Kremlin. And the Kremlin are telling you that. But speculation that the settlement will be easier with a new US president is premature, and what actions he will take, time will tell. The old Garaman, time will tell. It's just like, yeah, turns out that Trump and Putin are pretty much singing off the same song sheet. Well, that's good to know, isn't it? Well done. You know, just reject Ukraine and get into bed with Putin. You appear to be fine bedfellows. Maybe Christopher Steele's got some imagery on that. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for listening. I really appreciate your support. And I would absolutely even more appreciate your support for this wonderful cause, for Ukraine. Already that is ticking up. Another couple of donations since we began, another $150 on that. We are almost 72% there. Fantastic stuff. Keep going, guys, and let's get us into first place. That'd be amazing. Speak soon. Oh, and please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And please click on, knocking things over with my gesticulations. Please click on my ugly mutt up there, my face, to subscribe to the channel, because we're trying to get to 50,139 subscribers by the 2nd of January. We're probably not going to do it. We can only do it if you do click on my face. So please click on my face.